Hi, Dr. Yass here. In this episode, I want to discuss a specific incident, kind of a case study regarding an individual that was told that he required a shoulder replacement and, in fact, did his due diligence and went to three different orthopedists, and all three recommended that he get a shoulder replacement. And just through word of mouth, he found out that I'm a diagnostician who simply doesn't take things for what they are, and decided to come to me to confirm whether he did in fact require the shoulder replacement, and if not, what could be done. So I really like looking at these case studies because I personally think that almost every one of you out there who's being told that they need a shoulder replacement falls into the same situation this guy does. This guy did, and therefore I think that if you listen to the situation, it'll hit home to you, and maybe it'll awaken you to the understanding that just because someone says something doesn't make it fact. And I don't even care if three people say the same thing. If they're all educated and trained to believe and do the same thing, then it's not three different opinions. It's in fact three exact same opinions. And if the original opinion is wrong, then all three are wrong. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to just go through the process of how the Yass method worked and what the results were at the end. And like I said, take it for what it is. If you want to just proceed with your shoulder replacement, go ahead. But if this makes sense to you, that the high probability is that you don't need a shoulder replacement, then listen carefully to what happened and see if this sounds similar to your circumstance. So the guy comes in and he explains his circumstance. He was told he's bone on bone. It was done through an MRI. And that's basically the basis by which he's being told that he requires the shoulder replacement. What's his story? If he tries to raise his arm up to about here, he gets pain. And the pain impedes his ability to raise it any farther. It basically gets to here, just about 100 degrees of shoulder flexion coming forward, raising the arm forward, and then he feels pain, so it stops. So someone says, well, the pain comes and the limitation comes because you're bone on bone, so you need a shoulder replacement. And what does this guy know about this? He doesn't know nothing about it. So he just assumes so. So that's what he shows me. So I have to explain to him that the physical presentation of being bone on bone actually has to represent what it would look like in the joint. So for everyone to understand, if this is your arm bone, the head of the arm bone, and this is the shoulder joint, the normal presentation is that there is a space between the head of the arm bone and the shoulder joint, which is maintained by something called the labrum, which is a cartilaginous tissue. So the tissue sits here and it kind of maintains this space. And the reason is because as you raise your elbow, the head of the arm bone has to drop to allow the elbow to rise. If the head of the arm bone doesn't drop, it's going to come up with the elbow and it's going to impact the top portion of the shoulder blade, which is called the acromion process. So again, if the head of the arm bone goes up with the elbow, it impacts and you have limited motion and pain. But if it drops, it clears, maintains this space, and clears the way for the elbow to rise perfectly. So what was important to understand is that you could have limited motion, especially associated with pain, due to a mechanical impedance. The head of the arm bone isn't moving down properly because of a muscular deficit, which is creating the impacting into the top of the shoulder blade bone, which is the acromion process, and that's impeding the ability to go further along with pain. If in fact bone on bone existed, then that would mean that that labrum had been perfectly worn away and that in fact the head of the arm bone was touching the shoulder bone. Well, if that's the case, then how do you get any glide at all? No glide. And if you don't have glide, how does the head of the arm bone drop to prevent from rising and impacting the top of the shoulder blade bone, the acromion? So it wouldn't just be that there'd be a loss of range of motion. First off, there'd be a loss of range of motion, but it most likely wouldn't be painful when you get there, because it's just the impedance of the bone gliding which is stopping the range of motion. And when you reach that point, let's say it was 100 degrees. If I said, okay, you just relax and I'm going to try to raise your arm further, I wouldn't be able to raise it any further because there's a structural impedance. This tightness, there's no gap, no space is preventing that arm bone from gliding down, the head of the arm bone. So you're stuck basically. So whether the person tries to raise the arm or an external, he tries to use his other arm, or somebody else tries to raise it, it's stuck. It's stuck at the same position, in this case, 100 degrees, okay? So bone on bone means that the cartilage has been worn away, that the head of the arm bone is touching the shoulder bone, and therefore there's no glide. And with no glide, you're going to get a major loss of range of motion. And at that point, if someone tries to raise the arm any further, they can't. The ability for the individual person who's having the problem to raise their arm is exactly equal to if somebody other than that person tries to raise the arm. So I said, okay, what's the first step? Let's see if you're bone on bone. So he raised it to 100 degrees. And then I said, okay, you just lay down, relax. And I said, I'm going to just try to raise your arm. Let's see what happens. And I get his arm all the way up here while he's laying down, because he's fully relaxed now when he's laying down. So his muscles aren't working. So I get it up 30 degrees, 40 degrees higher than where he was stuck. What does that mean to you? What that means is that the limiting factor in only going to 100 degrees is muscle. And the pain is coming because his muscles aren't creating the proper mechanics for the arm bone to function properly, to get the drop of the head of the arm bone to allow the elbow to rise up. So he's pinching the bicep or something else that runs between the head of the arm bone and the top portion of the shoulder blade, this acromion process. Something here is getting caught because this is coming up and not dropping, right? So right off the bat, as soon as we knew that I could raise his arm 20, 30, 40, 50 degrees more than he could, the cause of his pain is muscle. It is not bone on bone. And therefore, we could immediately discount that as a diagnosis and immediately diffuse the idea that this guy had any benefit coming from getting a shoulder replacement. Right off the bat, the guy's already comforted. He's already saying, wow, you've just shown me something and proved something that nobody else has proved to me, and what you're saying makes sense. So then I did an evaluation of his muscles, and it turns out that his rotator cuff not only had strained, but had shortened severely. The rotator cuff wraps around the head of the arm bone, and it runs from slightly below. So it's supposed to contract and pull down. But if it's tight, there's no ability of it to drop because it's so tight, it's kind of holding it in its spot. So not just that the rotator cuff was strained, but that it was strained and shortened. Basically guaranteed if that arm bone came up, this was coming with it. And that's why he was pinching. So basically, I found that his rotator cuff was weak and a couple of other muscles, the lower trap, the rhomboids and mid traps. I found his shoulder to be very, very far forward, which was an indication there was an imbalance where his chest muscles, his anterior deltoid bicep was stronger than his muscles between his shoulder blades, the posterior shoulder, and the triceps. And what that does is when that arm bone comes forward, if this is the shoulder joint and this is the head of the arm bone, that's drawn forward like that. That changes the congruency, how much of the head of the arm bone is touching the shoulder side, the shoulder blade side. Well, you need 100% congruency of the bone so that when the muscle is pulling to move the joint, you need as much bone surface area to absorb the force of the muscles pulling. If it's all the way out here, you only have a small amount of the head of the arm bone touching the shoulder blade. So all the same muscles are trying to pull, they're just trying to pull through a much smaller area. That makes it very hard for the mechanism to work. It makes it inefficient. So I actually massaged out his pec, and you could see his arm bone came from here to here. And right after that, I said, raise your arm, just from massaging out the pec and reorienting the head of the arm bone to be more centered in the joint, gave him 10, 20 degrees more range of motion. Then I massaged out the rotator cuff and stretched it, and he got even further. So now, where he started, say, here, now he's already to here. And his other arm goes here. So then we did a series of 5 exercises, and each one is isolating specific muscles, and we're using progressive resistance, making sure that the muscles are adapting to the resistance, which eventually gets them stronger and allows each individual muscle to integrate into the function of raising the arm. And that's how you get full function. And sure enough, by the end of the hour-and-a-half session, we're doing some massage and some stretching. This guy had full range of motion and was pain-free. From here at pain to here, pain-free and fully functional. And he became a believer. And he said, no questions asked. I never needed the surgery. I was never bone on bone. It doesn't matter what the picture said. It didn't matter who was trying to interpret it. The physical presentation now shows me that I have plenty of joint space. I have full range of motion, and that the limitation I had was in the weakness of muscles altering the mechanics of the joint, impeding the joint from functioning properly. And within one session, I regained full function and was pain-free. So he's now just going to sustain the exercises. He's going to have full range of motion, pain-free in that joint, equivalent to his other arm, and he's going to be a happy guy. And he was prevented from getting a surgery, not only that it wasn't necessary, but the post-surgical symptoms probably would have impeded him from ever being able to develop enough strength in all the other muscles that are required to create normal function. And he probably would have ended up with a major loss of range of motion forever, indefinitely. That's the lesson I want to tell in this video. Guy thought he did his due diligence, got his 3 opinions, all said he needed bone on bone, based on an image that was interpreted by 3 guys who happened to do surgery for a living. Physical presentation clearly showed there was no chance in hell he could have been bone on bone. By doing some basic massage and strengthening of the appropriate muscles, the guy in the one session regained full function and had full range of motion and was pain-free. That's what you could obtain through the Yass Method. So if this video is helpful to you, please give it a thumbs up. If you like my YouTube channel, Dr. Mitchell Yass, please subscribe to get notifications when new videos are added or when I'm live on YouTube. If you'd like to contact me, maybe you have some questions now that you've heard this about your circumstance, you can do so by contacting me at drmitch@mitchellyass.com. If you feel like this makes sense and you'd actually like to have a session with me, if you're in Jacksonville, Florida, that's no problem. You can do that in person. But if you're anywhere in the world and you'd still like to get the Yass Method and the value from it, you could do it virtually by going to my website, livewithoutpains.com, livewithoutpains.com. And if you put in /sessions, you'll be on the sessions page, and there you'll see the Calendly scheduler, so you can pick a day and time that works best for you. And we'll set the session up. All you need is a resistance band and a chair. That's the total level of equipment you need. The sessions are videotaped. We make sure that you get that going forward to make sure you know what you're doing and doing everything correctly with the appropriate resistance. Then we end up doing follow-up sessions every 2 weeks to make sure you achieve your goals in the shortest period of time. So that sounds good to you. Again, it's livewithoutpains.com/sessions to schedule your Yass Method Zoom session. So for now, this is Dr. Mitchell Yass, wishing you a pain-free, fully functional life. Bye-bye for now.